Okay, before we get started here, I mentioned the marine algae before that's really good at absorbing light. In fact, it's perhaps the most efficient organism at harnessing solar energy. And NASA, many years ago, figured out a way to turn this phenomenon, which is ultimately based on complex ions at the center of these large molecules for harnessing the energy, into a project where they can use these algae to generate biofuels and also to treat waste at the same time. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's called the Omega Project. There's a schematic diagram there of all the different things it can do, but ultimately it comes down to some complexes that make this harnessing of solar energy possible. And I mentioned this before, but I'm just going to do it again. So pigments are what are in plants and, well, certain kinds of and animals too, I suppose, that harness energy from the sun. And three of those pigments are chlorophyll A, B, and C, green, yellow, and red. You can see at the top. And you can see the molecular structures here. So that's the A is the one that's green. Traditionally, you might think of chlorophyll as green, not all of it. Chlorophyll B is yellow. Maybe you did an experiment in high school where you separated chlorophyll A and B from something like a spinach leaf. I think you'll do that next year in organic chemistry. And then chlorophyll C is red, which you see in other species. And I think I put this picture up before. One of the reasons why that marine algae is so particularly good at it, it has such a range. It has chlorophyll A, B, and C in it. Also has another class of pigments called carotenoids. You may have heard of beta carotene in carrots. And then other ones called anthocyanins. So it has this whole host of pigments that work together to harness the energy from the sun. It's pretty incredible. And that's just sort of a teaser. And also, it's good to just talk about interesting things from time to time, in addition to the standard content of the course, which is interesting, but kind of more applications. Okay, let's keep going here. So we're under letter B. I think letter A was the basic definitions or something like that. We're going to take a look at three-dimensional considerations for complex ions. What's nice is these types of three-dimensional structures pretty much are exactly the same, with a couple of exceptions, to the VSEPR shapes you did before. So linear, bent, tetrahedral, all those kinds of things. Most of those, not all for good reasons, come back into consideration here. And I'm just going to go through the basic shapes and give you some examples and talk you through some. I'll give you a chance here to get caught up. So selected shapes. So we use an M for an abbreviation for just some generic transition metal at the center, and L for ligands. And you have your handout, which will tell you the different kinds of monodentate, polydentate, and bidentate ligands. So the first one is pretty straightforward. Linear. Fine. You have a metal ligand, and you have a metal in the middle, and you have two ligands, one on each side. And the coordination number here is 2. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Let me give you an example of that. And I'm going to work on my handwriting here. So Ag silver NH3, put in parentheses because K. And this particular ion has a +1 charge. Now, just to review, you would be expected to do a bunch of things with this. So coordination number is 2. Okay, that's pretty easy. You'd also be able to ask to figure out that it's Ag with a +1 charge. That silver is an exception to the rules in terms of electron configurations. So the silver plus ion would actually have the electron configuration krypton 4d10. So this is a D10 complex. Now go back and figure out what the electron configuration is of silver metal neutral by itself. It's an exception to the general rules of Aufbau. And then take away one electron, and this is what you would be left with. Okay, just go back and convince yourselves. And if you're not sure what that is, you can ask in class. It's no problem. And the way we would draw this is pretty straightforward. So we would just do silver. And there are no lone electrons on the middle. They're all core, especially now that we have this 4d10 shell. This is, you might recall, it's called a pseudo noble gas configuration. And then we simply bond to the nitrogen in the ammonia. And it's linear, so this is 180 degrees for a bond angle. It's not really a bond angle, but you get the idea. It's a straight line. Fine. Easy enough. The next one, trigonal planar. Fine, you just add another one. I'll give you an example here. So I guess I should draw a line there. So this is trigonal planar now. So copper with 3 cyano ligands. And this has a -2 charge, which would lead you to deduce that copper has a +1 charge, because cyanide is -1. And could lead you to deduce, again, copper is another exception, argon 3d10 would be the electron configuration, and this would be a D10 complex as well. Again, no lone electrons on the center. It's trigonal planar, so we simply draw 3 bonds in the same plane. It's attached through carbon, you might recall. So we just got to put N. Whoops, that's not right. None of those dashes or wedges here. And the bond angle here is 120 degrees. I guess the first one is a bond angle, 180 degrees. That's right. Okay, so there is no such thing as trigonal pyramid. That's a good thing to write down. Why? That's actually a good conceptual question. Why, when you have a metal with 3 ligands hanging off of it, can you not have trigonal pyramid? Answer: there are no lone electrons on the central atom to distort the shape. Like ammonia, if you go back and do that structure, there's 2 lone pairs, there's 2 lone electrons, 1 lone pair on the central nitrogen atom. That pushes the other 3 bonds away, so it goes from planar to pyramidal. Here, there are no electrons on the central copper to distort, if you will, the bond angle. So there's no such thing as trigonal pyramidal here. Okay, moving on, I think I'm going to do some erasing while you copy the next ones down. The next 2 are tetrahedral and square planar. We're going to consider those together because there's really no easy way to distinguish one from the other. So I'm just going to give you some general guidelines that you'll just kind of want to memorize. And I just need some time here to erase this. That's probably going to be one negative consequence of using this. I guess I could spread things out over multiple slides, but slows things down a bit, but that's all right. We're not going to be in any hurry. This will save time in class. Okay, so square planar is, well, and tetrahedral is where you have a central atom, central metal, and 4 ligands. How do you know the difference? Well, okay, I'm going to have to kind of give you some things to know here. So we'll do tetrahedral up here. I guess we'll do square planar down here. You can put those in your notes wherever you want. An example of tetrahedral is a pretty neat one, actually. It's nickel with 4 carbonyl, carbon monoxide. So it's big C, big O, not big C, little o, carbon monoxide. 4 of those. And this actually has, this is an example of a metal complex that has no charge to it. That 0 is sometimes not even written. So I just want to be clear that it has no charge. So this is going to be nickel metal. Or if you want, you can write nickel with no charge. And you can do the electron configuration for that if you wish, but I'm not going to do all that right now. And if it's tetrahedral, again, how do we know that? Well, I'll tell you in a second. We would draw this structure. So it's nickel, 2 bonds in the same plane, one coming out from the screen or paper, one going back to the screen or paper. You can put that dashed line on the other side if you want to. And it connects through the carbon. And just to make sure that we're doing a complex, you can still put brackets around it, even though it has a 0 charge. And the bond angle in tetrahedral is 109.5. Fine. When do you see these? You see tetrahedral when you have no or low charge on the metal. In this case, there's no charge, so that's going to be tetrahedral. Or D0 and D10 complexes. Now, I didn't do the electron configuration here, but you can go back and do that. Those are the 2 times you will see tetrahedral metal complexes. An example of square planar, which is really just something you're going to want to know. Square planar occurs when you have D8. Well, when you have a coordination number of 4 and D8. And I'm just going to give you an example here. So the example here is nickel with 4 chlorine ligands. And I should emphasize this. Some of you may have picked up on this before. When we do complex ions, we put the ligand typically in parentheses. So rather than showing it as an ionic compound by itself. So we put it in parentheses, even though it looks a little strange because it's monatomic. And in this case, the charge is -2, and you would be expected to deduce that this is nickel with a +2 charge, and that the electron configuration is argon 3d8. 3d8. Let me erase that and make that much more clear. Sorry, I advanced the slide a little bit. I shouldn't have done that. And if it's square planar, well, then you would draw it as a square plane. Okay. So this case, it would be nickel. And how do you do that? Well, 2 going back into the board and 2 coming away from the screen, board, whatever it is. And they're all in one square plane, all in the same plane, coming in and out of the plane of the screen. And -2. And these are square planar are for D8 complexes. So when you see a D8, that's going to be square planar. Just know that. There's really no easy way around that one. Okay, the last 2 are pretty straightforward, and I think I can do those fairly quickly. It's interesting. I did this video before as a trial run, and I talked way too long. It was almost a half an hour. So I'm redoing it. Trying to cut through some of the unnecessary elaboration, which we can do in class, but for notes, you just need to know what to do. That's fine. The last 2, if you have a coordination number of 5, so metal with 5 ligands, that's Trigonal Bipyramidal. There's really no other choice. And if you have a central metal with 6, we've already seen examples of that, that has no choice but to be octahedral. So for Trigonal Bipyramidal, we can bang these out pretty quickly. Let's just take cobalt Cl5 with 5, and for octahedral, we're just going to take cobalt Cl6, which is perfectly legit, by the way. Ligands can grab onto metals at various ratios, and I'm just making them up. These are 2 real compounds. Excuse me. In this case, the complex has a 3- charge, and this one, since there's 1 fewer chlorine, this one has a 2- charge. Both of them have cobalt +3 as the central metal cation. Again, you should be expected to do all of that. We probably don't need to draw these, but I'll do it anyway so you can see them. Trigonal Bipyramidal, well, it's cobalt. It's a triangular plane in the middle, 1 above the plane, 1 below the plane. So chlorine, 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 and chlorine. Put it in brackets, 2-. Octahedral, I think you know that one. That's going to be kind of tough to draw here. And you can put in the chlorines on your own, but it's cobalt. We've done this before. So it's a square plane, not a triangular plane, and 1 up and 1 down. Just add chlorines on there. And that's octahedral. There's no other choice. You don't have to memorize anything. The only ones you really have to memorize anything about are when is it tetrahedral and when is it square planar. If you can remember that D8 are square planar, if it's a coordination number 4, then you're good. Because if it's not D8, then it's tetrahedral. Or I'll just tell you which one it is because it's kind of a small topic. Another example of octahedral that we talked about, just to give it to you, is from the demo. So copper 2 sulfate pentahydrate is actually not the best way to describe that compound. It's a complex ion. And this is that blue solid that we've used many, many times that I heated it in the demo and drove the water away, and then added the water and the hydrate formed again. It was exothermic. So that's from the demo that we did. All right, those are the three-dimensional considerations. Just be able to layer that in to everything we've done. And the last thing, which is also three-dimensional, is something called isomers, which are basically the same atoms, in this case metals and ligands, arranged differently in three-dimensional space. So let me give you a chance to write that down. This is a big part of organic chemistry and biochemistry. Your body, for example, has very specific isomers in it for your metabolism. If you didn't have those specific isomers, like they were somehow like switched around or the mirror image, they wouldn't work. And we're skipping the part in chapter 19, if you're following along there, on what are called optical isomers. They're important, yes, but you'll learn more about those in other courses. It's just not really, we're not going to do anything with them, so we decided not to talk about them in this course. And the other three are pretty straightforward. Okay. Geometric isomers. Oh, I should say, not every metal complex has isomers. For instance, cobalt with 5 chlorines and cobalt with 6 chlorines. There's no other way that those can be arranged in space. Those are not, so you can't do isomers of those. So you won't see this in every single case. But geometric isomers is where you could take, say, typically we're talking about 2 ligands, and put them either across from each other or next to each other. So they're either on the same side of the three-dimensional structure, cis means sames, or same, or opposite on the structure, which is trans. It's a pretty straightforward definition if you can just remember what cis and trans means, same and opposite. Okay, well, what's an example? Again, not every structure will have these isomers, and I'm just going to use a pretty easy one. So for geometric isomers, let's look at copper with 4 water ligands. You might remember from the demo I added ammonia to that blue solution that got purple. Well, it's because this was happening. Ammonia was coming in and displacing some of those 6 waters, and it was turning more purple. It's kind of interesting. This is NH3, excuse me. So it's copper with 4 water ligands and 2 ammonia ligands. And overall, this still has, because ammonia and water are neutral, a 2+ charge. Just for practice, we could do this here. This is a coordination number of 6. It's octahedral. And, excuse me, it's copper with a +2 charge at the middle. And this is going to be a D9 complex. Just be able to do that. So we have 2 ways we can draw this one. We can draw it with the ammonias on opposite sides or the same side. So let's just set up the basic structure for octahedral: up, down, back, back, out, out. Or since I said there was 2, let's just do that. So copper, up, up, back, back, out, out. Make these pictures better in your notes, obviously. So I could put the ammonias on opposite sides, or I could put them, whoops, NH3, remember it bonds to the nitrogen, or I could put them right next to each other, so a 90-degree angle rather than a 180-degree angle. This is called the trans isomer. This is called the cis isomer. And then we have to put in the waters. Remember, it bonds through oxygen. So H2O, H2O, OH2, OH2, H2. Okay, you get the idea. So cis, same side, trans, opposite side. Those are called geometric isomers, cis and trans. Linkage isomers. If you don't have your chapter 19 handout either printed out and sitting in front of you, just kind of take a look at that. you are given a set of ligands on there, monodentate ligands. There's two that are called ambidentate. This type of isomer is pretty easy. It only applies to ambidentate ligands. And ambidentate means it's the same ligand that can bond through two different atoms. So it's like ambidextrous. So it's pretty straightforward. I don't think I could fit all that in here. So I just need to get some space. I don't need all this space for this one. There's only two of them. There's the thiocyanate and the nitrite. So you've got, so you only have to be able to recognize two of these. So from the table, you have NO2 minus, where it bonds through the nitrogen. And to be explicit about it, we rewrite it as ONO. Still minus, but it bonds through one of the oxygens. It doesn't really matter which one because it's symmetric. Then the other one is SCN, thiocyanate. And, well, basically flip it around 180 degrees. So you're writing the binding atom first, NCS minus. So the binding atoms are always written first. Okay, just as an example, maybe it's a trivial example. Cobalt, let's just take that with 5 ammonia ligands and the SCN. I'm not going to put that in parentheses. It looks a little clunky when you do. And that would have a 2+ charge. Or you could simply flip the thiocyanate ligand around to put the N first. It's not really that terribly difficult. NCS. 2+. Excuse me. So pretty easy. You just flip it around. All you have to do is just recognize the two ambidentate ligands that we're going to basically use in this course. And quite frankly, not that much. The last one is also pretty straightforward. And, well, let me get it on the screen, but then I'm going to need some space. Probably can't read that. I'll get better at this. Ionization isomers. Remember that when you have an ion, in this case these big complex ions, you need some kind of a counter ion before it turns into a solid. So if you have a positive complex like this first one, and I may actually just make up an example using this first one rather than rewrite everything. So you have to have the counter ions to make it an overall neutral molecule. So if we start out with this as our ion, if you want to make that a neutral molecule, we'd have to add some anions to it. So let's do this. I'm being a little cheap, kind of cheating here, but why not? So that it's a +2 charge. So we have to have 2 negative charges to balance this out. So let's just take, how about bromine? Bromine is another ligand. And we have to take 2 bromines to make it a neutral molecule. Each bromine is -1. Fine. Bromine can be a counter ion or a ligand. So we could do a lot of things here. We could take one of these bromines and displace one of these, well, molecules that's in here. We could do that. And that's what's called an ionization isomer. Okay. This one's not exactly the best example, but we can just do it anyway. I don't think it really matters. We'll probably do more of these in class anyway. We would just take a bromine. Yeah, this is not the best example, but it'll make the point. And you'll see these in the book. These are pretty easy. Well, let's say it displaces one of those. It kicks out one of the ammonias and replaces it with a bromine. Well, now you really don't need, and now all you need is this bromine out here. That's actually not the greatest example, but it makes the point. You'll see some other examples in the book and you can do your homework. So, preview of coming attractions. So that's it for the notes for this particular lesson. It's about, I don't know, 25 minutes long, a little longer than I wanted it to be, but that gives you the basic idea. Where we're going to head next is to remind yourself of some basic physics. So if you remember the visible region of the spectrum. This is violet, this is red, so you've got that Roy G. Biv thing going on here. High energy, low energy, this is wavelength, so we'll calculate wavelength and frequency and energy and joules and all that good stuff. If you take the visible spectrum and turn it into a wheel and look at complementary colors, this will allow us to relate the way something looks to your eyes as compared to the color of light that it absorbs. So you might remember this from like elementary art class. If something looks like it's yellow, it tends to absorb in the purple region of the spectrum. These boundaries are fuzzy, so don't take these as hard and fast rules. So that's where we're headed, and we will pick up with the next lesson. So good work.